The afternoon sun was beginning to set as the colonel drove through the quiet town. He had spent the entire day at the Pentagon in Washington, sitting through long meetings about classified military operations. His uniform was crisp and clean, decorated with ribbons and medals that told the story of his 25 years of service to his country. He was tired and wanted nothing more than to get home to his family. The town he was driving through was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Main Street had a few shops, a diner, and a gas station. Children were playing in a park near the school. The colonel slowed down as he passed the school zone, checking his speedometer carefully. He was going exactly 25 miles per hour just as the sign indicated. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror. The colonel felt confused. He looked at his speedometer again. He was still going the right speed. He checked his turn signals and brake lights mentally. Everything had been working fine. He signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, putting his car in park and placing both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. The police officer who approached his window was young, maybe in his late 20s. His uniform was tight across his chest and he wore dark sunglasses even though the sun was setting. His hand rested on his belt near his weapon. The officer's entire body language suggested aggression, not the professional courtesy the colonel had experienced in other traffic stops throughout his life. "License and registration," the officer barked without any greeting. His tone was sharp and commanding, the kind of voice meant to make people feel small and afraid. "Good evening, officer," the colonel said calmly and respectfully. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" He kept his hands visible on the wheel, not wanting to make any sudden movements. "I'll ask the questions here," the officer snapped. "You were speeding through a school zone. That's 30 miles per hour in a 25. You people think the rules don't apply to you?" The colonel felt his eyebrows raise slightly. He knew for certain he had been watching his speed carefully. He had checked his speedometer multiple times while driving through town, but he also knew that arguing with a police officer on the side of the road rarely helped any situation. "I understand, officer. I believe I was going the speed limit, but I'll get my documents for you." The colonel slowly reached toward his glove compartment, announcing his movements clearly. "I'm reaching for my registration now." He pulled out his registration and his driver's license. Then he reached for his military identification card. He held all three documents out the window. The officer snatched them from his hand roughly, barely looking at them before turning back toward his patrol car. The colonel sat quietly, watching in his side mirror as the officer walked back to his vehicle. He noticed the officer toss the military ID onto the passenger seat of the patrol car without even a glance. This surprised him. Usually, when officers saw military identification, they at least acknowledged it with a nod or a thank you for your service. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The colonel checked his watch. He had been sitting on the side of the road for 15 minutes now. In his mirror, he could see the officer sitting in his car appearing to be doing something on his computer. But 15 minutes for a simple speeding ticket seemed excessive. Finally, after 20 minutes, the officer emerged from his patrol car. But this time his hand was actually touching his weapon. His other hand held the colonel's documents. His face showed no emotion behind those dark sunglasses, but his jaw was clenched tight. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer commanded when he reached the window. "Excuse me?" the colonel asked politely. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I said step out of the vehicle, now." The officer's hand gripped his weapon tighter. "Don't make me ask again." The colonel felt his military training kick in. He assessed the situation quickly. This officer was escalating things unnecessarily, but the colonel also knew that refusing could make things worse. He slowly opened his door and stepped out, keeping his hands visible at all times. "Is there something wrong?" the colonel asked again, his voice still calm and measured. "I'm happy to cooperate, but I'd like to know what this is about." The officer looked him up and down with obvious disdain. His eyes lingered on the colonel's uniform, on the medals and ribbons, on the rank insignia that indicated high military authority. But instead of respect, the officer's face showed something else. It showed contempt. "Military, huh?" the officer said with a smirk. "Think that makes you special? Think those little ribbons mean you're better than everyone else?" The colonel was stunned. In all his years of service, through deployments to war zones and peacekeeping missions, through ceremonies with presidents and foreign leaders, He had never been spoken to this way about his uniform. Not in America, not by a fellow public servant. "I don't think I'm better than anyone, officer," the colonel replied carefully. "I simply serve my country just as you serve your community. We're both public servants." "Don't compare yourself to me," the officer spat. "I'm the law here. On these streets, I'm the authority. Not you, not your uniform, not your rank, me." The officer stepped closer, invading the colonel's personal space. It was an intimidation tactic, one the colonel recognized immediately. He had seen it used in interrogations and confrontations. It was meant to make the other person feel threatened and powerless. But the colonel had faced down enemy combatants in war zones. He had negotiated with hostile foreign officers. He had made life and death decisions that affected thousands of soldiers. A small-town police officer trying to intimidate him with aggressive body language was not going to work. Still, the colonel remained respectful. He took a small step back, giving the officer space not because he was intimidated but because he wanted to de-escalate. "I understand, officer. How can I help you?" "You can start by telling me where you're coming from," the officer demanded. "And don't lie to me. I can tell when people are lying." "I'm returning from Washington," the colonel answered honestly. "I had meetings at the Pentagon today. I'm heading home now." The officer's smirk grew wider. "The Pentagon?" "Right. And I'm sure you're going to tell me you're someone important, someone special. Let me guess, you're a general or something?" "I'm a colonel as my identification shows," he replied simply. "And yes, I do work on projects at the Pentagon. That's all public information from my ID." "A colonel," the officer repeated mockingly. "Well, Colonel, here's what's going to happen. You're going to open your trunk for me. I want to see what you're carrying. And don't tell me no, because that just makes me think you're hiding something." The colonel felt his jaw tighten slightly. This was unreasonable. This was not proper procedure. The officer had no probable cause to search his vehicle. More importantly, the colonel's car contained classified documents from his Pentagon meetings, sealed in a security case. Those documents could not be opened or viewed by unauthorized personnel. "Officer, I cannot allow a search of my vehicle," the colonel said firmly but politely. "I have sensitive military documents in my possession. They're classified, and federal law protects them from unauthorized viewing. I'm sure you understand." The officer's face turned red. His hand gripped his weapon even tighter. "Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that you think you're above the law. You think your little uniform gives you special privileges. Well, let me tell you something, Colonel. In this town, you follow my rules, and if you don't open that trunk right now, I'm going to arrest you for obstruction." The colonel took a deep breath. This situation was spiraling out of control quickly. The officer was clearly on a power trip, and nothing the colonel said seemed to help. He needed backup, not from the police, but from his own chain of command. But before he could say anything else, the officer reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I need backup at my location. I have a suspect refusing to comply with a lawful search. Possibly armed. Send additional units." The colonel closed his eyes briefly. This young officer had just called him a suspect and possibly armed to dispatch. The situation had just become very serious. He kept his hands visible and remained calm. His training had prepared him for hostile situations, but he never thought he would need that training on an American street. Dealing with an American police officer. Within minutes, he could hear sirens approaching. This traffic stop had just become something much bigger. 2 patrol cars pulled up behind the first one, their lights flashing red and blue in the growing darkness. 2 more officers stepped out of their vehicles, and the colonel could immediately see the difference between them and the first officer. These 2 looked professional, their faces showing concern rather than aggression. They walked over slowly, assessing the situation carefully. The first officer waved them over with exaggerated gestures. "This suspect is refusing to comply with a lawful search," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the street. "He's being uncooperative and hostile." The colonel remained standing calmly beside his vehicle, his hands clasped in front of him where everyone could see them. He made eye contact with the 2 new officers, hoping they would see that he was not being hostile at all. One of them, an older officer with gray hair, seemed to understand immediately. His eyes moved from the colonel to the first officer, and a small frown appeared on his face. "What's going on here?" the older officer asked, directing his question to his colleague rather than the colonel. "Speeding through a school zone," the first officer said quickly. then refused to allow a vehicle search. Got aggressive when I pressed the issue. Started talking about how he's military and above the law. The colonel felt frustration building but kept his voice level. Officer, that's not accurate. I've been completely cooperative. I simply explained that I cannot allow a search because I'm carrying classified military documents. It's federal law, not personal preference. The third officer, a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, looked at the colonel's uniform more carefully. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw his rank and the array of medals on his chest. Colonel, she said quietly. He's a colonel? Doesn't matter what rank he is, the first officer snapped. On my streets, I'm the authority, not him. Now are you two going to help me or not? The older officer stepped closer to the colonel. Sir, may I see your identification again? His tone was respectful, completely different from the first officer's attitude. Of course, the colonel replied. He gestured toward the first officer. Your colleague has my documents. The older officer turned to his colleague and held out his hand. Let me see his ID. Reluctantly, the first officer handed over the documents. The older officer examined them carefully, his eyes moving between the military ID card and the colonel's face. Then he looked at the driver's license and registration. Everything was in order. Everything was legitimate. Sir, you're a long way from home, the older officer said to the colonel. What brings you through our town? I was at the Pentagon for meetings today, the colonel explained. Classified briefings. I'm on my way home now. I have the documents from those meetings in a sealed security case in my trunk. Those documents cannot be viewed by unauthorized personnel. Federal regulations protect them. The older officer nodded slowly. He seemed to understand the situation. He turned to the first officer. Did you have probable cause for a search? I don't need to explain myself to you, the first officer shot back. His face was red now, angry at being questioned. I'm the senior officer on scene. I made the stop. I'm handling it. You called for backup, the female officer pointed out. That makes it all of our responsibility now, and I'm not seeing any probable cause here. The first officer's hand went back to his weapon. It was an unconscious gesture, but everyone noticed it. The colonel noticed it. The other two officers noticed it. And the tension in the air immediately increased. Are you questioning my judgment? The first officer asked, his voice low and dangerous. Both of you? The older officer held up his hands in a calming gesture. Nobody's questioning anything. We're just trying to understand the situation. Let's all stay calm and work this out professionally. But the first officer was beyond calm now. His power was being challenged, not just by the colonel but by his own colleagues. And he clearly could not handle that. He turned back to the colonel, his jaw clenched tight. I'm going to ask you one more time, he said slowly. Open your trunk. Let me search your vehicle, or I will arrest you right here, right now, for obstruction of justice. The colonel met his eyes steadily. Officer, I cannot do that. I'm not refusing because I want to be difficult. I'm refusing because federal law requires me to protect those documents. If you force me to open that trunk and expose classified materials, you could be violating federal security laws. Both of us could face serious consequences. Is that a threat? The first officer shouted, stepping even closer. Are you threatening a police officer? It's not a threat, the colonel replied calmly. It's a fact. I'm trying to protect both of us from a very complicated legal situation. The female officer stepped forward. Sir, she said to the first officer, maybe we should call the sergeant. Let him make the call on this. I don't need the sergeant, the first officer yelled. He was losing control now, his professionalism completely gone. I know how to do my job. I don't need some military guy telling me about laws, and I don't need you two second-guessing every decision I make. Cars were slowing down as they passed the scene. People in the nearby houses were coming out to their porches to watch. The colonel could see phone cameras being raised. People were recording the confrontation. In today's world, everything ended up online eventually. The first officer noticed the cameras too. And instead of calming down, it seemed to make him perform even more. He raised his voice louder, making sure everyone could hear. This man is refusing to comply with police orders. He thinks his military rank makes him special, but the law applies to everyone. The colonel said nothing. He simply stood there, hands visible, posture non-threatening. He let the officer's words hang in the air. Anyone watching the videos would see exactly what was happening. They would see a calm, uniformed military officer being harassed by an aggressive police officer. The truth would be obvious. The older officer tried one more time. Look, why don't we all just take a breath here? Colonel, would you be willing to call your command? Maybe have someone verify your story about the classified documents? I'd be happy to, the colonel replied immediately. I can call my Pentagon liaison right now. They can explain the situation and verify my credentials. He doesn't need to call anyone, the first officer interrupted. This is my stop, my call, and I say he opens the trunk or goes to jail. The female officer shook her head slightly. She looked at the older officer, and some silent communication passed between them. They both knew the situation was wrong. They both knew their colleague was out of control, but neither of them seemed to know how to stop it without making things worse. A small crowd had gathered now on the sidewalk across the street. About 15 people stood there watching and recording. The colonel could hear their voices carrying over to him. That's Officer Jenkins, one person said. He's always like this. Remember when he pulled over that family last month? Another voice added. Made them wait for 2 hours for no reason. Someone should report him, a third voice suggested. People have reported him, the first voice replied. Nothing ever happens. Officer Jenkins heard the comments too. His face grew even redder. The colonel could see a vein pulsing in his neck. The officer was embarrassed, angry, and feeling like he was losing control of the situation. That made him dangerous. Everyone step back, Jenkins yelled at the crowd. This is police business. Stop recording and move along. But nobody moved. This was a public street. They had every right to be there. They had every right to record, and they knew it. Jenkins turned back to the colonel with fury in his eyes. This is your fault, he hissed. You and your attitude. You come into my town with your uniform and your medals thinking you're better than us. Thinking you can ignore my authority. The colonel shook his head slowly. Officer, I have never once said or implied that I'm better than anyone. I've been respectful from the beginning. I've explained my situation clearly. I've offered to call my command to verify everything. I don't know what else you want from me. I want you to respect my authority, Jenkins shouted. The other two officers looked uncomfortable now, shifting their weight from foot to foot. I do respect your authority, the colonel said quietly, but your authority has limits just like mine does. You can't force me to break federal law. You can't force me to expose classified documents. That's not disrespect. That's just how the law works. Jenkins pulled out his handcuffs. The metallic sound of them being removed from his belt seemed loud in the evening air. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. The older officer finally stepped in. Hold on now. Let's not be hasty here. We don't have grounds for arrest. I have plenty of grounds, Jenkins snapped. Obstruction, failure to comply, suspicious behavior. That's more than enough. The female officer pulled out her radio. I'm calling the sergeant, she said firmly. This needs supervision. Don't you dare, Jenkins warned her. But she had already pressed the button on her radio. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We need a sergeant at our location. We have a situation that requires a supervisor. Jenkins looked like he might explode. His hand was still on his handcuffs, his other hand near his weapon. The colonel remained perfectly still, knowing that any movement right now could be interpreted as threatening. The crowd across the street had grown larger. What started as a few curious neighbors had become at least 30 people, maybe more. They lined the sidewalk, standing in front of the small shops and businesses that made up the town's main street. The colonel could see the glow of phone screens and the dimming light. Everyone was recording. A woman in her 60s stepped forward from the crowd. She wore a cardigan and held a small dog on a leash. Officer Jenkins, she called out. What's going on? Why are you bothering this man? Jenkins whirled around to face her. Ma'am, step back. This is official police business. I can see it's police business, the woman replied, not backing down. I can also see that man is in a military uniform and you've got 3 patrol cars here. Seems like a lot of fuss for a traffic stop. Nobody asked for your opinion, Mrs. Patterson, Jenkins shot back. Another voice came from the crowd, this time a man in work clothes. Jenkins, this is ridiculous. Let the man go. He's not causing any trouble. Yeah, another person agreed. We can all see what's happening here. This is harassment. Jenkins's face was almost purple now. He took a step toward the crowd, his hand still resting on his belt. All of you need to disperse. Right now, or I'll start handing out citations for disturbing the peace. We're on the sidewalk, a young man pointed out. Public property. We have a right to be here. The older officer who had been standing quietly near his patrol car walked over to Jenkins. He spoke in a low voice, but the colonel could still hear him. "This is getting out of control. We need to wait for the sergeant and calm this down." "Don't tell me what we need to do," Jenkins hissed back. "I'm handling this." "You're not handling anything," the older officer replied, his voice still quiet but firm. "You're making it worse. Look around. Half the town is watching. This is all being recorded. Whatever happens here is going to be public." Jenkins turned away from him angrily. He looked at the colonel with pure hatred in his eyes. It was personal now. It wasn't about a traffic stop or a search anymore. It was about Jenkins feeling disrespected and challenged in front of his community. From the crowd, an elderly man pushed his way to the front. He was tall and thin, probably in his 70s, wearing a baseball cap with military insignia on it. He squinted at the colonel's uniform, studying the rank and medals carefully. Then his eyes went wide. "Sweet Lord," the elderly man muttered. "Do you know who that is?" He was speaking to the people around him, but his voice carried across the street. "Who?" someone asked. The elderly man pointed at the colonel. "Look at his uniform. Really look at it. Those aren't regular medals. That's the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with Valor device, the Purple Heart with oak leaf clusters, meaning he's been wounded in combat multiple times, and look at his rank insignia. He's a full colonel." Several people in the crowd leaned forward, looking more carefully. They could see what the elderly veteran was describing. The colonel's uniform told the story of a distinguished military career. This wasn't some low-level soldier. This was a senior officer who had served in combat and been decorated for bravery. "What's he doing in our town?" a woman asked quietly. "Probably just passing through," the veteran replied. "But Jenkins has no idea what he's dealing with. You don't get to that rank with those medals unless you're someone important, someone who knows people, someone with connections." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder. The colonel could hear bits and pieces of their conversations. They were talking about Jenkins's reputation. They were sharing stories of other people he had harassed. Other times he had abused his power. "Remember the Smith family?" one person said. "He pulled them over last year and made them unpack their entire moving truck on the side of the road. Claimed he smelled marijuana. Found nothing. What about that college kid?" another added. "The one passing through on his way home for Christmas. Jenkins kept him there for 3 hours in the cold. The kid missed his flight. Someone reported him for that, didn't they?" a third voice asked. "Yeah, but nothing happened. The chief said there wasn't enough evidence of wrongdoing." The stories kept coming, each one painting a picture of an officer who regularly overstepped his authority. The colonel listened but said nothing. He remained standing calmly beside his car, his hands clasped in front of him, his expression neutral. He was letting Jenkins dig his own hole deeper and deeper. A teenager near the back of the crowd held his phone up high, making sure he had a clear view of the scene. "This is crazy," he said to his friend. "I'm streaming this live. Already got like 200 people watching." "Send me the link," his friend replied. "I'll share it." Within minutes, the confrontation was spreading beyond the small crowd on the street. It was going out to social media, being shared and commented on by people all over the region. The pressure on Jenkins was building, though he didn't seem to realize it yet. Mrs. Patterson, the woman with the dog, stepped even closer to the edge of the sidewalk. "Officer Jenkins, I've known you since you joined the force 5 years ago. This isn't right, and you know it. Let this man go. Stop this nonsense before you do something you can't take back." Jenkins ignored her. He walked back to the colonel, getting right in his face again. "You think you're smart, don't you? Getting these people on your side. Turning them against me. But it won't work. I'm still the law here." The colonel met his eyes calmly. "Officer, I haven't said a word to anyone in that crowd. They can see what's happening with their own eyes. They're drawing their own conclusions." "Shut up," Jenkins snapped. "Just shut up." The female officer who had called for the sergeant walked over to the crowd. She spoke to Mrs. Patterson quietly. "Ma'am, could you folks please step back a little? Give us some room to work?" "We're not in your way, dear," Mrs. Patterson replied kindly. "We're just concerned citizens watching our tax dollars at work." The female officer's lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but she caught herself. "I understand. Just please stay where you are and let us handle this." She walked back to where the colonel and Jenkins stood. She looked at Jenkins carefully. "The sergeant will be here soon. Maybe we should just wait for him before we do anything else." "I don't need the sergeant to do my job," Jenkins said through clenched teeth. Nobody said you did, the female officer replied. But this situation is complicated. Military credentials, classified documents, federal law, that's above our pay grade. Let the sergeant make the call. Jenkins looked like he wanted to argue, but before he could speak, another car pulled up. This one wasn't a patrol car. It was a regular civilian vehicle, a Honda sedan. A man in his 40s got out, holding a professional camera. He wore a press badge around his neck. Great, Jenkins muttered. The press is here. The reporter approached the scene slowly, his camera already raised. I'm with the County Tribune. Can someone tell me what's happening here? This is an active police investigation, Jenkins announced loudly. You need to leave. I'm on public property, the reporter replied calmly. I have a right to observe and report. Freedom of the press. Jenkins looked like his head might explode. Now he had not just a crowd of citizens watching and recording, but actual media. This was becoming a public relations disaster, and he still didn't seem to understand how bad it was going to get for him. The reporter moved along the sidewalk, positioning himself for the best angle. He raised his camera and started recording. Can anyone tell me what's going on? He called out to the crowd. Several people started talking at once, explaining what they had seen. They described Jenkins pulling over the colonel. They described the aggressive behavior. They described the threats and the demands for a search without probable cause. Each person added details, building a complete picture of the confrontation. The reporter was recording it all. He then turned his camera toward the colonel, zooming in on the uniform and medals. The colonel stood perfectly still, maintaining his composure. He knew that his behavior right now was just as important as anything Jenkins was doing. He needed to look calm, respectful, and professional. He needed to be the opposite of Jenkins in every way. The elderly veteran pushed his way forward again. He walked right up to the edge of the street, looking at the colonel carefully. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He stood at attention and gave a crisp military salute. The colonel, despite the awkward situation, returned the salute with equal precision. It was automatic, ingrained from years of military service. The gesture was simple, but it carried weight. It was one service member acknowledging another. It was respect and recognition. Thank you for your service, sir, the elderly veteran called out clearly. Thank you for yours, the colonel replied. Jenkins watched this exchange with fury in his eyes. To him, it probably felt like everyone was ganging up on him. The crowd, the reporter, even this old veteran, all of them were showing respect to the colonel while making Jenkins look like a bully. The reporter moved his camera between the colonel and Jenkins, capturing the stark contrast. On one side, a decorated military officer standing calmly and respectfully despite being harassed. On the other side, a local police officer, red-faced and aggressive, his professionalism completely gone. This is going to be on the news tonight, someone in the crowd said. Maybe even the national news if it goes viral. It's already viral, the teenager replied, still holding his phone up. I've got over 1,000 people watching the stream now. Comments are blowing up. Jenkins heard this. The colonel could see the moment when reality started to sink in for the officer. His expression changed from anger to something else. Fear, maybe. Or realization. He looked at all the phones recording him. He looked at the news camera. He looked at the growing crowd. But instead of backing down, Jenkins seemed to double down. It was like he had gone too far to turn back now. Admitting he was wrong would mean humiliation. So he had to keep going, had to justify his actions, had to prove he was right. This man is a suspect in a criminal investigation, Jenkins announced loudly, speaking to the crowd and the camera. He has refused to comply with lawful orders. He is interfering with police work. His military status doesn't matter. The law applies to everyone equally. The older officer stepped forward quickly. Jenkins, stay out of this! Jenkins cut him off. I'm the primary officer on this stop. I'm making the decisions. The reporter lowered his camera slightly. Officer, what crime do you suspect him of? What's the probable cause for the search you're requesting? Jenkins pointed at the reporter. I don't have to explain myself to you or anyone else. This is police business. But the public has a right to know, the reporter pressed, especially when it involves the potential violation of a citizen's rights. This man appears to be cooperating. He's standing calmly. His hands are visible. He doesn't appear to be threatening anyone. So what's the justification for this confrontation? Jenkins started to respond, but he was interrupted by the sound of another siren. This one was different, deeper. A larger vehicle was approaching. The sergeant was finally arriving. The crowd parted slightly as a police SUV pulled up behind the patrol cars. A man in his 50s stepped out wearing a supervisor's uniform. His face was serious and his eyes moved across the scene quickly, taking everything in. The crowd, the cameras, the reporter, the 3 officers, and the colonel standing beside his car. The sergeant walked directly to Jenkins. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at him with an expression that clearly said they would be having a serious conversation later. Then he turned to the colonel. "Sir, I'm Sergeant Thompson. I apologize for any inconvenience. Can you tell me what happened here?" Finally, someone was treating the situation professionally. The colonel nodded. "Sergeant, I was pulled over for allegedly speeding through a school zone, though I believe I was going the posted limit. I provided all my documentation, including my military ID. The officer then demanded to search my vehicle. I explained that I'm carrying classified military documents from Pentagon meetings today, and that federal law prevents me from allowing unauthorized access to those documents." The situation escalated from there. Sergeant Thompson listened carefully. He looked at the colonel's uniform, at his rank, at his medals. Then he looked at Jenkins. "Did you have probable cause for a search?" Jenkins hesitated. "I suspected he might be transporting illegal materials." "Based on what?" the sergeant asked. His behavior was suspicious. "How so?" Jenkins struggled to find an answer. He was defensive, uncooperative. The colonel spoke calmly. "Sergeant, with respect, I was neither defensive nor uncooperative. I simply explained that I legally cannot allow access to classified materials. I even offered to call my Pentagon liaison to verify my credentials and situation." The sergeant nodded slowly. He looked around at all the cameras, at all the witnesses. This situation was public now, completely public, and whatever he decided next would be recorded and analyzed by thousands of people. Sergeant Thompson looked at his watch. The colonel had been detained on the side of the road for over 30 minutes now. That was far too long for a simple traffic stop, and everyone knew it. The sergeant's face showed his frustration, though the colonel couldn't tell if that frustration was directed at Jenkins or at the situation as a whole. "Officer Jenkins, return this gentleman's documents to him," Thompson ordered. Jenkins's jaw clenched, but he handed the license, registration, and military ID back to the colonel. His movements were stiff and angry, like a child being forced to apologize when he didn't think he was wrong. The colonel took his documents and returned them to his wallet. He hoped this was the end of it. He hoped the sergeant would send everyone on their way and deal with Jenkins internally. But something in Thompson's expression told him it wasn't going to be that simple. "Sir," Thompson said to the colonel, "I need to ask you some questions for my report. This situation has attracted a lot of attention, and I need to document everything properly. You understand?" "Of course, Sergeant," the colonel replied. "You said you're carrying classified documents from the Pentagon. Can you provide any verification of that claim?" It was a fair question. The colonel nodded. "I can call my Pentagon liaison. They can verify my identity, my security clearance level, and confirm that I was at meetings today. Would that be sufficient?" "That would help," Thompson agreed. "But I also need to see some kind of credentials that prove you have the authority to transport classified materials. A military ID shows your rank, but it doesn't necessarily show security clearance levels." The colonel understood. The sergeant was being thorough, probably because of all the cameras and witnesses. He wanted everything documented properly, so there would be no questions later about how he handled the situation. This was the moment. The colonel had hoped to avoid it, but now he had no choice. He needed to show his full credentials. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, announcing his movements clearly so no one would misinterpret. "Sergeant, I'm reaching into my jacket for my Pentagon Authorization credentials. I'm moving slowly so everyone can see." "Go ahead, sir," Thompson said, watching carefully. The colonel's fingers closed around the leather case in his inner pocket. He pulled it out slowly and held it up where Thompson could see it. Then he opened the case. Inside was a badge larger than a regular ID card. It was made of metal with an official seal embossed on it. The words Department of Defense and Pentagon Special Authorization were clearly visible. Below that was the colonel's name, rank, and a number. On the reverse side was a photograph and more official markings, along with a holographic seal that proved it was authentic and not a fake. Sergeant Thompson's eyes widened. He reached out carefully and the colonel handed him the case. Thompson examined it closely, turning it over to look at both sides. He held it up to the light, checking the holographic security features. Then he looked at the colonel with new understanding in his eyes. "This is a special authorization badge," Thompson said quietly. "I've only seen one of these once before in my entire career." "Yes, sir," the colonel confirmed. Jenkins stepped closer, trying to see what Thompson was looking at. "What is it? What's so special about another ID card?" Thompson held the badge up so Jenkins could see it, though he didn't let him touch it. "This isn't just an ID card. This is Pentagon Special Authorization. It's only issued to senior military personnel who work on matters of national security at the highest levels. People with this kind of clearance have access to information that could affect the entire country's safety." The color drained from Jenkins's face. For the first time since the stop began, he seemed to realize the magnitude of what he had done. He had been harassing and threatening someone who operated at the highest levels of national security. The colonel spoke calmly but firmly. "Sergeant, as you can see, my vehicle and the documents I'm carrying are protected under federal security protocols. The classified materials in my trunk are sealed in an approved security container. They cannot be opened or viewed by anyone without the proper clearance. Attempting to force me to open that container and expose those documents would be considered interference with national security operations." Thompson nodded slowly. He was processing all of this, understanding the legal minefield they had stumbled into. "Sir, I understand completely. I apologize for the delay and the inconvenience." "I appreciate that, Sergeant," the colonel replied, "but I think you need to understand the full situation. This wasn't just an inconvenience. For the past 30 minutes, I've been threatened, intimidated, and accused of crimes I didn't commit. I've been treated disrespectfully while trying to remain cooperative and professional. And all of this has been recorded by dozens of witnesses and is likely spreading across social media right now." Thompson's face grew more serious. He looked at Jenkins with an expression that was hard to read. Anger, disappointment, frustration, all of it seemed to be there. "Officer Jenkins, step over to my vehicle. Now." Jenkins opened his mouth to argue, but Thompson's expression stopped him. He walked slowly to the sergeant's SUV, his shoulders slumped. The confident, aggressive officer from before was gone, replaced by someone who suddenly realized he was in serious trouble. The colonel stood by his car, waiting. The crowd across the street was still watching, still recording. The reporter was capturing everything. The other two officers stood nearby, looking uncomfortable and uncertain about what would happen next. Thompson returned a few minutes later, leaving Jenkins sitting in the SUV. "Sir, I need to make a phone call. Would you be willing to provide me with the contact information for your Pentagon liaison?" "Of course." The colonel pulled out his phone and found the number. He showed it to Thompson, who wrote it down carefully. "I'm going to call them to verify your credentials and status," Thompson explained. "It's just standard procedure given the unusual circumstances." "I understand completely," the colonel said. "Would you like me to speak with them first to authorize them to share information with you?" "That would be helpful, yes." The colonel dialed the number. It rang twice before a voice answered. "Pentagon Military Liaison Office, Major Williams speaking." "Major, this is Colonel Richards. I have a situation that requires verification of my credentials and today's activities." There was a brief pause. "Sir, are you secure?" "I'm on an open line, but the situation requires information sharing. I'm with a local police sergeant who needs verification that I'm authorized to transport classified materials. I'm going to put you on speaker and hand the phone to him." "Understood, sir." The colonel pressed the speaker button and handed his phone to Sergeant Thompson. "You're speaking with Major Williams at the Pentagon Military Liaison Office." Thompson spoke clearly into the phone. "Major Williams, this is Sergeant Thompson with the Millbrook Police Department. I'm verifying the identity and authorization level of a Colonel Richards who is in our jurisdiction. He claims to have been at Pentagon meetings today and is transporting classified documents." "One moment, Sergeant." There was the sound of typing. Then Major Williams came back on the line. "I can confirm that Colonel Richards was at the Pentagon today for classified briefings. He is authorized to transport sealed classified materials within his assigned security protocols. His Pentagon Special Authorization badge number is PD7436 Alpha. Can you verify that number from his badge?" Thompson looked at the badge still in his hand. "Confirmed. Number matches." "Sergeant, I need to be clear about something. Major Williams continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The materials Colonel Richards is carrying are classified at a level that requires federal protection. Any attempt to access, view, or interfere with those materials without proper authorization could result in federal charges. The colonel is within his legal rights to refuse any search or inspection of those materials by local authorities. Thompson nodded, even though the major couldn't see him. I understand completely, Major. There will be no search. Good. Is there anything else you need from me? Just one more thing. Can you confirm Colonel Richards's current status and whether there are any warrants, flags, or concerns about his conduct or security clearance? Colonel Richards is in good standing with the Department of Defense. His security clearance is active and current. There are no warrants, no flags, no concerns whatsoever. He is authorized to travel freely within the United States while carrying classified materials, as long as proper security protocols are maintained. Thank you, Major. That's all I needed to know. Sergeant, may I ask what prompted this inquiry? Thompson hesitated. The colonel was pulled over for a traffic stop that escalated into a confrontation. My officer requested a vehicle search, and the colonel refused based on the classified materials. The situation became complicated. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Major Williams spoke again, his voice was cold and formal. I see. Sergeant, I need to inform you that any detention or harassment of personnel carrying Pentagon Special Authorization credentials must be reported to the Department of Defense. This is mandatory protocol. I'll need your full name, badge number, and department contact information. Thompson's face went pale. He looked at the colonel with new understanding. This wasn't just a local police matter anymore. This had federal implications. My name is Michael Thompson, badge number 347. Millbrook Police Department in Millbrook, Virginia. Our main number is area code 540-555-0147. Thank you, Sergeant. You'll be receiving a call from our office within 24 hours. This incident will be reviewed by the Department of Defense to ensure proper protocols were followed and that national security was not compromised. I understand, Major. Is Colonel Richards still with you? Yes, he's right here. Put him back on the line, please. Thompson handed the phone back to the colonel, who took it off speaker and held it to his ear. Yes, Major? Sir, are you all right? Have you been threatened or injured in any way? I'm fine, Major, no injuries. The situation was tense, but I maintained my composure. Do you need any assistance? I can have federal agents there within the hour if necessary. The colonel looked around at the crowd, the cameras, the officers. He thought about Jenkins sitting in Thompson's SUV, about the old veteran who had saluted him, about the community that had gathered to watch and record. He thought about what would happen if federal agents showed up. It would become an even bigger incident, more media attention, more questions. That won't be necessary, Major. I believe the situation is resolved. Sergeant Thompson seems to have things under control. Are you certain, sir? Given your authorization level and the sensitivity of your current assignment, we take these matters very seriously. I'm certain, but I would appreciate if the Department of Defense follows through with their review. I think it's important that local law enforcement understands the protocols around Pentagon Special Authorization badges. Absolutely, sir. You can count on it. Is there anything else you need? No, Major. Thank you for your assistance. Stay safe, sir. And please file a full report when you reach your destination. Will do. The colonel ended the call and put his phone back in his pocket. Sergeant Thompson stood there holding the badge case, looking like a man who had just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. Sir, I sincerely apologize for this entire situation. You're free to go, of course. No citation, no search, no further delays. The colonel took his badge case back and returned it to his pocket. I appreciate that, Sergeant. But we both know this isn't over. That call made it clear that the Department of Defense will be reviewing this incident. They'll want to know how one of their authorized personnel was treated. They'll want to know if security protocols were followed. Thompson nodded miserably. I understand. What's going to happen to Officer Jenkins? The colonel asked. That's an internal matter, Thompson replied, but his tone suggested that Jenkins's future with the department was very much in question. But I can tell you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. The colonel looked across at the crowd, still watching. He looked at the reporter, still recording. He looked at the other two officers, who had been professional and respectful throughout. Then he looked back at Sergeant Thompson. I don't enjoy this situation, Sergeant. I didn't come to your town looking for trouble. I just wanted to drive home after a long day of work. But what happened here tonight represents a serious problem. An officer used his authority to harass and intimidate someone without probable cause. He refused to listen to reason. He escalated a simple traffic stop into a federal incident. That's not acceptable. No, sir, it's not. Thompson agreed quietly. I hope your department takes this seriously. I hope Officer Jenkins gets the training or counseling he needs. Because based on what I heard from the crowd, I'm not the first person he's treated this way, and if nothing changes, I won't be the last. Thompson had no response to that. He simply nodded, his face showing the weight of the situation. The colonel walked around to his driver's side door. He paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at Thompson one more time. One more thing, Sergeant. You handled this situation professionally once you arrived. You asked the right questions, made the right calls, and showed proper respect. I wanted you to know that I'll include that in my report to the Department of Defense. You're not the problem here. Thompson looked relieved. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. The colonel got into his car and started the engine. The colonel sat in his car with the engine running, but he didn't drive away immediately. Through his windshield, he could see Sergeant Thompson walking back to his SUV, where Officer Jenkins waited. The crowd across the street was still there, phone still raised, still recording everything. The reporter was now interviewing some of the witnesses, his camera moving from person to person. The colonel took a deep breath. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, but he could feel the adrenaline starting to fade. For the past 45 minutes, he had maintained perfect composure under pressure. He had stayed calm when Jenkins was aggressive. He had been respectful when he was being disrespected. He had followed every protocol, every rule, every procedure. And now it was paying off. His phone buzzed. A text message from Major Williams. Sir, I've initiated the incident report with DOD. They're taking this seriously. Federal review will begin tomorrow morning. Do you need anything else? The colonel texted back. Thank you, Major. I'm about to leave the scene. We'll file complete report when I get home. Another buzz. Understood. Safe travels, sir. The colonel put his phone in the cup holder. He was about to shift into drive when he noticed something in his rearview mirror. Sergeant Thompson was getting out of his SUV, and his body language suggested an intense conversation had just taken place. Jenkins emerged from the passenger side, his face pale and his eyes downcast. Thompson pointed toward Jenkins's patrol car, and Jenkins walked to it slowly like a man heading to his own execution. The older officer and the female officer approached Thompson. The three of them stood together, speaking in low voices. Even from his car, the colonel could see the tension in their postures. This was a serious situation for the entire department, not just for Jenkins. The colonel's phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number, he answered, wondering if it was another Pentagon office. Colonel Richards speaking. Colonel, this is Police Chief Robert Morrison from Millbrook PD. Sergeant Thompson just called me with a summary of what happened tonight. I'm calling to personally apologize for how you were treated. The colonel was surprised. Chief Morrison had responded quickly, which suggested he understood the seriousness of the situation. Chief, I appreciate the call. Colonel, I need you to know that the behavior you experienced tonight does not represent our department's values or standards. Sergeant Thompson filled me in on the details, including the fact that you carry Pentagon Special Authorization credentials. I'm a retired Marine myself, so I understand the significance of that. You served? The colonel asked. 20 years, retired as a master sergeant. Got out in 2010. So when Thompson told me what happened, I understood immediately how badly Officer Jenkins screwed up. Pardon my language, sir. The colonel allowed himself a small smile. No apology necessary, Chief, and thank you for your service. Thank you for yours, sir. Look, I'm heading to the scene right now. Should be there in about 10 minutes. Would you be willing to wait so I can speak with you in person? I know you've been delayed long enough, but I'd really appreciate a few minutes of your time. The colonel considered this. He was tired. He wanted to go home, but he also recognized that Chief Morrison was trying to handle this the right way. I'll wait, Chief. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. The call ended. The colonel shifted his car back into park and turned off the engine. He got out and leaned against his door, crossing his arms. The evening air was cool now and the streetlights had come on. The crowd had thinned slightly, but at least 20 people remained, including the reporter. Thompson noticed the colonel had gotten out of his car. He walked over, his expression questioning. Sir, I thought you were leaving, Chief Morrison called. He asked me to wait so he could speak with me in person. He said he's about 10 minutes out. Thompson nodded. He called me just after I spoke with Officer Jenkins. He was not happy, to put it mildly. He's taking this very seriously. What did Jenkins say? The colonel asked. Thompson hesitated. Sir, that's an internal personnel matter. I understand. But I think you should know that I overheard what some of the witnesses were saying. This isn't the first time Jenkins has abused his authority. Multiple people in that crowd mentioned other incidents. If your department is going to investigate this properly, you might want to talk to some of those people. Thompson looked over at the crowd. You're right. I'll make sure we do that. He paused, then added quietly, Between you and me, sir, I've had concerns about Jenkins for a while. He's got a chip on his shoulder, always trying to prove he's tough, always escalating situations that should be simple. I've talked to him about it, but nothing seems to change. Sometimes people aren't suited for the authority they're given, the colonel said. I've had to remove officers from their positions in the military for similar reasons. It's not about punishment. It's about recognizing that not everyone has the temperament for certain jobs. That's a good way to put it, Thompson agreed. A black sedan pulled up behind the line of patrol cars. A man in civilian clothes got out, but the colonel recognized the bearing immediately. Former military, probably senior enlisted or officer. The man walked with purpose, his back straight, his movements efficient. This had to be Chief Morrison. The chief spotted Sergeant Thompson and the colonel standing together. He approached quickly, his hand extended. Colonel Richards? Chief Robert Morrison, thank you for waiting. The colonel shook his hand. Morrison had a firm grip and direct eye contact. Chief. Sir, I cannot apologize enough for what happened here tonight. This is not how we operate. This is not how we treat anyone, let alone a senior military officer carrying national security credentials. I appreciate that, Chief. Morrison turned to Thompson. Sergeant, I need you to secure the scene and get statements from witnesses, especially anyone who recorded video. We're going to need all of it for the investigation. Yes, sir. Already planned to do that. And where's Jenkins? In his patrol car, sir. Morrison's jaw tightened. Tell him to wait there. Don't let him leave. I'll deal with him after I finish speaking with the colonel. Understood, sir. Thompson walked away to carry out his orders. Morrison turned back to the colonel. Sir, can you walk me through exactly what happened? I got the summary from Thompson, but I want to hear it directly from you. For the next 15 minutes, the colonel recounted the entire incident. He spoke calmly and factually, describing each event in chronological order. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. When the colonel finished, Morrison was silent for a long moment. That's inexcusable, Morrison finally said. Everything about how Jenkins handled this was wrong. The traffic stop itself might have been legitimate, though we'll review his dashcam footage to verify. But everything after that was a disaster. He had no probable cause for a search. He was aggressive and threatening. He ignored your explanation about classified materials. He made the situation personal instead of professional. What's going to happen now? The colonel asked. Morrison looked him in the eye. Jenkins will be placed on administrative leave immediately, tonight. There will be a full internal investigation. Given the federal nature of this incident, the Department of Defense will conduct their own review. And honestly, sir, based on what you've told me and what I'm hearing from witnesses, I expect Jenkins will be terminated. That's a serious consequence, the colonel said. It's a serious violation, Morrison replied. Look, I know you're probably thinking about lawsuits and complaints and all of that, and you'd be well within your rights to pursue any legal action you want. But I'm asking you, one veteran to another, to give me a chance to handle this internally first. Let me investigate it properly. Let me take the appropriate action. And if you're not satisfied with how we handle it, then you do whatever you think is right. The colonel considered this. He could tell Morrison was sincere. The chief wasn't trying to cover anything up or protect a bad officer. He was trying to do the right thing for the department and for the community. Chief, I'm not interested in lawsuits or public battles. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. If Jenkins has been treating other people this way, that needs to stop. And your department needs to understand the protocols around Pentagon Special Authorization badges so this situation never happens again. Agreed on all counts, Morrison said firmly. And I can promise you that we'll implement new training immediately. Every officer in this department will learn about military credentials and federal security protocols. They'll learn about de-escalation and professional conduct, and they'll learn that abusing authority is a fast track to losing your badge. The reporter had approached during their conversation, staying at a respectful distance but close enough to hear. Morrison noticed him and sighed. "I suppose you want a statement?" "If you're willing to give one, Chief," the reporter replied. "The public is going to want to know how the department is handling this." Morrison straightened his shoulders. "All right, put that camera on me." The reporter raised his camera and Morrison spoke clearly and directly to it. "I'm Chief Robert Morrison of the Millbrook Police Department. Tonight, one of our officers conducted a traffic stop that escalated inappropriately. The citizen involved was treated in a manner that does not reflect our department's values or training. I have personally apologized to the individual, who is a decorated military officer serving our country at the highest levels. Effective immediately, the officer involved is on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We take this matter extremely seriously, and we will ensure that appropriate action is taken. The Millbrook Police Department is committed to serving our community with professionalism and respect. And when we fall short of that standard, we will hold ourselves accountable." The reporter lowered his camera. "Will there be any federal involvement in the investigation?" "The Department of Defense conducts mandatory reviews when personnel with certain security credentials are detained or questioned by local law enforcement. That review will happen, and we will cooperate fully with it. Can you tell us the name of the officer involved?" "That will be released once the administrative process is complete. For now, I'll only say that it's one officer and his actions do not represent our entire department." The reporter seemed satisfied with that answer. He thanked Morrison and walked back toward the crowd to interview more witnesses. Morrison turned back to the colonel. "Sir, is there anything else you need from me? Anything else I can do to make this right?" The colonel thought for a moment. "Actually, yes. There's an elderly veteran in that crowd. He served and he recognized my uniform and medals. He saluted me. He showed me more respect in that one gesture than Officer Jenkins did in 45 minutes. I'd like you to meet him. I'd like him to hear directly from you that his police department is taking this seriously." Morrison smiled. "I'd be honored to meet him." "Which one is he?" The colonel pointed across the street. "The tall gentleman in the military baseball cap." They walked across the street together. The crowd parted respectfully as they approached. The elderly veteran straightened up when he saw them coming. "Sir," the colonel said to the veteran, "I wanted to thank you again for your salute earlier." "It meant a lot," the veteran smiled. "Just one soldier acknowledging another, son. Though I was only enlisted, never made it past sergeant." "Rank doesn't matter when it comes to respect," the colonel replied. "Service is service." Morrison extended his hand. "Sir, I'm Chief Morrison. I understand you're a veteran?" "Retired Sergeant First Class William Patterson," the veteran replied, shaking Morrison's hand. "Army, served in Vietnam and Desert Storm." "Thank you for your service, Sergeant," Morrison said. "I'm a retired Marine Master Sergeant myself. I wanted you to know that what happened here tonight is being taken very seriously. The officer involved will be held accountable." Patterson nodded approvingly. "Good. That boy has no business wearing a badge if he's going to act like that. I've seen him bully people before. It's about time someone did something about it. Would you be willing to make a statement about what you witnessed tonight?" Morrison asked. "And about any other incidents you mentioned?" "Absolutely," Patterson replied. "Whatever you need." Morrison handed him a business card. "Call me tomorrow at this number. I'll take your statement personally." They talked for a few more minutes, with other members of the crowd gradually joining the conversation. Multiple people offered to provide statements and video footage. The reporter interviewed several of them. The story was being documented from every angle by multiple sources. There would be no way for anyone to deny or minimize what had happened. Finally, after nearly an hour and a half since the initial stop, Chief Morrison walked the colonel back to his car. "Sir, you're free to go. Again, I apologize for this entire situation. You have my card. If you need anything, call me directly. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate how you've handled this." The colonel got into his car for the third time that evening. The colonel finally made it home at nearly 9 o'clock that evening, 3 hours later than planned. His wife met him at the door, her face showing both relief and concern. She had been calling his phone, worried when he didn't arrive home on time. "I'm sorry," he said, embracing her. "There was an incident. I'm fine, but it's going to be a complicated situation. Over dinner, he told her everything. She listened with growing anger, especially when he described how Jenkins had treated him. That officer should be fired, she said firmly. What he did was wrong on every level. He probably will be fired, the colonel replied. But that's not really my concern. I'm more worried about all the other people he's done this to. People who didn't have Pentagon credentials to protect them. People who didn't know their rights or were too scared to stand up for themselves. You're going to file a complaint, right? I already have, in a way. The Department of Defense will be conducting their review. The police chief promised a full investigation, and there were dozens of witnesses who recorded everything. The story's already spreading online. He pulled out his phone and did a quick search. Sure enough, videos from the incident were already posted on multiple social media platforms. The teenager who had been streaming live had thousands of views. The hashtag #Millbrook Police was trending locally. Comments ranged from supportive messages for the colonel to angry calls for Jenkins to be fired. The local news had also picked up the story. The reporter who had been at the scene had filed his report, and it was the top story on the county news website. The headline read, "Decorated military officer detained in controversial traffic stop." The article included several of the videos and quoted witnesses from the crowd. His wife read over his shoulder. This is going to be big, isn't it? Probably, the colonel admitted. Pentagon Special Authorization badges are serious business. When something like this happens, it triggers a whole chain of reviews and investigations. The Department of Defense doesn't take chances with national security credentials. That night, the colonel wrote his official report for the Pentagon. He documented every detail of the incident, from the initial stop to his final conversation with Chief Morrison. He included the names of witnesses, the badge numbers of all officers involved, and the approximate times of each event. The report was 12 pages long when he finished. He encrypted it and sent it through secure channels to Major Williams. Within an hour, Williams replied, "Report received and forwarded to appropriate offices. Expect contact from DoD Inspector General's office within 24 hours. They'll want additional statements. This is going to the highest levels, sir." The colonel wasn't surprised. Incidents involving special authorization personnel always did. The Pentagon took the security of its classified operations seriously, and anything that threatened that security received immediate attention from senior officials. The next morning, the story had grown. What started as a local news item had been picked up by regional outlets. By afternoon, national news organizations were reporting on it. The story had everything that made news compelling: military service, abuse of authority, dramatic confrontation, and clear video evidence. The colonel's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Veterans organizations wanted to express their support. Even some politicians' offices called, offering assistance. He politely declined most of them. He had said what he needed to say in his official report. He had no interest in turning this into a media circus, but he did agree to one call, from a representative of a military advocacy group. They explained that they tracked incidents of discrimination or mistreatment of service members and veterans. They wanted to know if they could use his case as an example in their training programs for law enforcement. Of course, the colonel agreed. If this can help train officers to handle these situations better, then something good will come from it. 3 days after the incident, the colonel received a call from a woman identifying herself as Inspector Amanda Chen from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office. She was professional and thorough, asking detailed questions about every aspect of the incident. The interview lasted 2 hours. "Colonel, based on our preliminary investigation, we've identified several concerning issues," Inspector Chen said toward the end of the call. "Officer Jenkins appears to have violated not only your civil rights, but also federal protocols regarding the detention of personnel with special security credentials. The Millbrook Police Department lacks proper training on these protocols, which is a systemic problem." "What happens now?" the colonel asked. "We'll complete our investigation and issue findings. Those findings will be sent to the local police department with recommendations for corrective action. We may also refer the matter to the FBI for potential federal charges depending on what we find." "Federal charges against Jenkins?" "Possibly. Interfering with national security operations is a federal offense. We're still determining whether his actions meet that threshold, but it's being considered." The colonel felt mixed emotions about that. He didn't want to destroy Jenkins's life, but he also understood that consequences had to mean something. Inspector, I'll leave that decision to your office and the FBI, whatever you think is appropriate. Thank you, Colonel. We'll keep you informed as the investigation progresses. Meanwhile, the local investigation was moving forward as well. Chief Morrison kept his word. He conducted interviews with dozens of witnesses. He reviewed all the video footage. He pulled Jenkins's personnel file and discovered a pattern of complaints that had been dismissed or downplayed over the years. 1 week after the incident, Morrison called the colonel personally. Sir, I wanted to update you on our investigation. We've completed the preliminary phase and the findings are damning. Jenkins has a history of aggressive behavior during traffic stops. We found 12 formal complaints filed against him in the past 3 years, and at least 20 informal complaints that were never properly documented. That's a lot of complaints, the colonel said. It's inexcusable that they weren't taken more seriously earlier. Morrison admitted. That's a failure of supervision and accountability. I take responsibility for that as the chief. We should have addressed this pattern before it got to this point. What's the next step? The disciplinary board meets in 2 days. Based on the evidence, I'm recommending termination. Jenkins will have an opportunity to present his side, but I don't see how he can defend his actions. The video evidence is clear. The witness statements are consistent, and the pattern of behavior is undeniable. What about the other complaints? The colonel asked. The people he mistreated before? We're reviewing all of them. Some may be reopened if the circumstances warrant it. We're also reaching out to those individuals to apologize and to let them know their complaints are being taken seriously. 2 days later, Officer Jenkins faced the disciplinary board. The hearing lasted 6 hours. Jenkins tried to defend his actions, claiming he was just doing his job and that the colonel had been uncooperative. But the evidence told a different story. The videos showed Jenkins being aggressive from the start. The witnesses testified about his threatening behavior. His own body camera footage contradicted his version of events. The board's decision was unanimous. Termination for cause. Jenkins would lose his badge, his position, and his law enforcement certification. He would never work as a police officer again in the state of Virginia. Chief Morrison announced the decision publicly, holding a press conference at the police station. After a thorough investigation, Officer Jenkins has been terminated from the Millbrook Police Department. His conduct during the incident with the military officer, combined with a pattern of similar behavior over several years, demonstrates that he is unfit to serve as a law enforcement officer. This decision was not made lightly, but it was made with the clear understanding that our officers must serve with integrity, professionalism, and respect for all citizens. The reporter who had covered the initial incident asked a question. Chief, what about the other complaints against Officer Jenkins? Will those be investigated? We are reviewing all previous complaints, Morrison replied. Where appropriate, we will reopen cases and conduct additional investigations. We have also contacted individuals who filed complaints to apologize for how their concerns were handled and to assure them that we are taking this seriously. Another reporter asked about the Department of Defense investigation. Morrison nodded. The DoD Inspector General's office is conducting their own review. We are cooperating fully with that investigation. Additionally, the FBI is looking into whether federal charges are appropriate. We support whatever action they deem necessary. The colonel watched the press conference on the news that evening. He felt a sense of satisfaction that the system had worked, even if it had taken a dramatic incident to force accountability. Jenkins was gone, unable to abuse his authority anymore. The department was implementing new training, and other victims were finally being heard. But he also felt a sense of sadness. This situation never should have happened. Jenkins should have been stopped years ago after the first few complaints. Better supervision and accountability could have prevented many people from being mistreated. 2 weeks after the incident, the colonel received an official letter from the Department of Defense. It was a formal apology from a senior official, acknowledging that the incident should never have occurred and outlining steps the DoD was taking to improve coordination with local law enforcement agencies across the country. The letter explained that new training materials were being developed for police departments nationwide, focusing on proper procedures when encountering military personnel with special security credentials. The training would be offered free to any department that wanted it. Chief Morrison immediately signed Millbrook PD up for the training. He also implemented new department policies requiring supervisors to review all traffic stops that lasted longer than 20 minutes. Any stop involving a search request would require supervisor approval, and all complaints would be investigated by an independent review board, not just by internal supervisors. The veteran community rallied around the colonel. He received letters and emails from service members and veterans across the country, thanking him for standing up for his rights and for helping to bring attention to the issue of how military personnel were sometimes treated by law enforcement. One letter particularly moved him. It was from a young Army lieutenant who had experienced a similar situation 2 years earlier, but had been too intimidated to fight back. "Thank you for showing us that we can stand up for ourselves," the lieutenant wrote. "Thank you for proving that rank and service mean something, and that we don't have to accept being bullied just because someone has a badge." The colonel wrote back to the lieutenant, encouraging him to report his past incident, so it could be investigated. "It's never too late to speak up," he wrote. "Your voice matters. Your experience matters, and by coming forward, you might prevent someone else from going through the same thing." A month after the incident, the FBI concluded their investigation. They decided not to file federal charges against Jenkins, determining that while his conduct was inappropriate and violated civil rights, it didn't quite meet the threshold for federal interference with national security operations. The classified documents had never been accessed or compromised, and Jenkins had ultimately backed down when confronted with the Pentagon Authorization. However, the FBI did send a formal letter to Jenkins, warning him that any future incidents involving military or federal personnel could result in federal prosecution. It was a shot across the bow, a warning that he was being watched. Jenkins himself disappeared from public view after his termination. Some people in town reported seeing him at the unemployment office. Others heard he had moved away, unable to face the community after his very public fall from grace. The colonel didn't spend much time thinking about Jenkins. His concern had always been bigger than one bad officer. It was about accountability, about systems that failed to check abusive behavior, about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The other two officers from that night, the older officer and the female officer, both received commendations from Chief Morrison. In his report, the colonel had specifically mentioned how they had tried to de-escalate the situation and had questioned Jenkins's approach. Morrison praised them for their professionalism and used them as examples during training sessions about proper conduct. The colonel was invited to speak at the Millbrook police station during one of those training sessions. He accepted, seeing it as an opportunity to build bridges and to help officers understand the military perspective on security and classified materials. 6 weeks after the incident, the colonel walked into the Millbrook Police Department for his scheduled training session. The station was modest, a single-story building with a small parking lot and a flagpole out front. As he walked through the entrance, he noticed several officers glancing at him with recognition and respect. Chief Morrison met him in the lobby. "Colonel, thank you for coming. The officers are really looking forward to hearing from you. I'm happy to help, Chief, though I have to admit I never expected to be back here under these circumstances." Morrison smiled slightly. "Life has a way of surprising us. Come on. Everyone's waiting in the training room." They walked down a hallway lined with photos of officers past and present. The colonel noticed that Jenkins' photo had been removed, leaving a small gap on the wall. It was a subtle but clear message about accountability. The training room held about 30 officers, representing most of the department's force. They stood when the colonel entered, a show of respect that touched him. He waved for them to sit. "Thank you all for being here," the colonel began. "I'm not here to lecture anyone or to criticize your profession. Law enforcement is a difficult job, one that requires split-second decisions and courage under pressure. I have tremendous respect for what you do." He spent the next hour explaining military security protocols, the different levels of clearances, and what Pentagon Special Authorization credentials meant. He showed them examples of proper military identification and explained how to verify credentials if they had questions. But more importantly, he talked about respect and de-escalation. He shared his perspective on what had happened that night, acknowledging that traffic stops could be tense for both officers and citizens. "When Officer Jenkins pulled me over, the colonel said. I wasn't angry or offended. Traffic stops happen. I understand that officers have a job to do. What frustrated me was how quickly the situation escalated beyond reason. I was respectful. I provided my documentation. I explained my situation clearly. But none of that mattered because the officer had already decided how the situation was going to go. Several officers nodded, recognizing the truth in his words. Here's what I learned from that experience, the colonel continued. Authority without restraint becomes tyranny. Power without accountability becomes abuse, and a badge without humility becomes a weapon used against the very people it's supposed to protect. He paused, letting those words sink in. Every one of you has authority. You have the power to detain people, to search them, to arrest them. That's an incredible responsibility, but that power should never make you feel superior to the people you serve. It should make you feel more responsible, more careful, more aware of the impact your actions have on others. A young officer in the front row raised his hand. Sir, how should we handle situations where someone is being uncooperative? Not everyone is as calm as you were. That's a great question, the colonel replied. And you're right. Not everyone will be calm. People get nervous during traffic stops. They get defensive. Sometimes they get angry. But here's the key. Your job is to de-escalate, not to match their energy. If someone is angry, you don't get angry back. If someone is scared, you don't make them more scared. You stay calm, you stay professional, and you treat them with dignity even when they're not treating you well. He talked about his military experience, about dealing with hostile situations in war zones where the stakes were literally life and death. If I could stay calm while negotiating with enemy combatants who wanted to kill me, your officers can stay calm with a nervous driver during a traffic stop. The female officer who had been at the scene that night raised her hand. Sir, what should we have done differently? Those of us who were called for backup? The colonel looked at her with appreciation. You did more than you probably realize. You questioned what was happening. You called for a supervisor. You tried to inject some reason into the situation. That took courage, because you were questioning a fellow officer in the middle of an incident. But that's exactly what good officers should do. You should hold each other accountable. You should step in when you see something going wrong. Chief Morrison added, That's part of our new policy. If officers see a situation escalating inappropriately, they have a duty to intervene. Not just the right to intervene, but the duty. We're all responsible for each other's conduct. The training session continued with questions and discussions. The officers wanted to know more about military culture, about how to recognize different types of credentials, about when they should contact military liaisons or federal agencies. The colonel answered patiently, using examples and scenarios to illustrate his points. Near the end of the session, Sergeant Thompson stood up. Colonel, I want to publicly apologize for how long it took me to get to the scene that night. If I had arrived sooner, maybe the situation wouldn't have escalated as far as it did. The colonel shook his head. Sergeant, you handled everything perfectly once you arrived. You asked the right questions, you verified my credentials, you called your chief. You didn't rush to judgment on either side. That's exactly what a supervisor should do. You have nothing to apologize for. Thompson nodded, looking relieved. After the formal training ended, several officers approached the colonel individually. They thanked him for coming, for sharing his perspective, for not painting all law enforcement with the same brush as Jenkins. One older officer pulled him aside. Sir, I've been on this force for 18 years. I've seen a lot of officers come and go. Jenkins wasn't a bad person, he was just wrong for this job. He couldn't handle the authority. It went to his head, made him think he was better than everyone else. I'm glad Chief Morrison finally dealt with it, even though it took something like your situation to force his hand. Do you think things will really change? The colonel asked. The officer considered the question. I think they already have. The whole department is more careful now. We're more aware of how we talk to people, how we handle situations. Nobody wants to be the next Jenkins. And honestly, that's a good thing. We should be held to a higher standard. Before leaving, the colonel met with Chief Morrison in his office. The chief poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for the colonel to sit. I want to show you something, Morrison said, pulling a folder from his desk. These are letters we've received since the incident. Some are from citizens thanking us for holding Jenkins accountable. Some are from people who had negative experiences with Jenkins in the past, thanking us for finally listening. And some are from officers in other departments, asking about our new training programs. The colonel flipped through the letters. Many of them were emotional, describing encounters with Jenkins that left people feeling humiliated and powerless. Reading them, the colonel felt a renewed conviction that speaking up had been the right choice. "Chief, I need to tell you something," the colonel said. "When this first happened, part of me just wanted to let it go. I thought about just driving away and forgetting about it. I didn't want the hassle of reports and investigations. But then I thought about all these people," he gestured to the letters. "All these people who didn't have Pentagon credentials to protect them, who didn't know their rights or were too scared to assert them. And I realized that if I just let it go, I'd be enabling the system that allowed Jenkins to keep abusing people." Morrison nodded. "And by standing up, you didn't just stop Jenkins, you changed our whole department. You made us look at ourselves honestly, at our failures of supervision and accountability. That's uncomfortable, but it's necessary." "What's going to happen to Jenkins?" the colonel asked. "Have you heard anything about him?" "Last I heard, he moved to another state, trying to start over somewhere where people don't know what happened. He can't work in law enforcement anymore, at least not in Virginia. His certification is revoked. Other states can see that on his record." "I hope he learns from this," the colonel said. "I hope he gets some perspective and realizes that his actions had real consequences for real people." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "You know what struck me about this whole situation? You never lost your temper. You never got aggressive. You never threatened anyone. You just calmly stood your ground and let Jenkins destroy himself with his own behavior. That showed more strength than any amount of anger would have." "That's my military training," the colonel replied. "In combat, losing control can get people killed. You learn to stay calm no matter what's happening around you. But more than that, I learned that dignity is something you carry yourself. Nobody can take it from you unless you let them. Jenkins tried to make me feel small and powerless, but I knew who I was. I knew my worth didn't depend on his opinion of me." They talked for another hour, discussing the changes being implemented in the department. New accountability measures, better complaint review processes, regular training on civil rights and de-escalation. Morrison was genuinely committed to reform, and the colonel could see that the department was on a better path. As the colonel prepared to leave, Morrison walked him to his car. "Sir, I know you declined to pursue any legal action against Jenkins or the department. I want you to know how much I appreciate that. It would have been well within your rights and many people would have sued us into the ground." The colonel shook his head. "Lawsuits don't fix broken systems. They just punish them. I wanted to see real change, and that's what's happening. Jenkins is gone, your department is improving, and hopefully other departments will learn from this example. That's worth more than any settlement. Still, if you ever change your mind, if you decide you want some form of compensation for what you went through, my door is always open." "I appreciate that, Chief, but I'm satisfied with how things turned out. Justice doesn't always mean punishment or money. Sometimes it just means making things right for the future." They shook hands, and the colonel got into his car. As he drove, away from the police station, he reflected on the past 6 weeks. What started as a simple traffic stop had become a catalyst for change. One officer had been held accountable. One department had reformed its practices. And hopefully, through the training materials being distributed nationwide, many other departments would learn these lessons without needing their own incident to force the change. The story had largely faded from the news cycle by now, replaced by newer stories and fresher controversies. But the colonel knew that the impact would continue for years. The officers he had trained today would remember his words. The policies Chief Morrison had implemented would shape how future officers behaved. The precedent set by the Department of Defense investigation would influence how military personnel were treated in similar situations. That evening, the colonel sat with his wife on their back porch, watching the sunset. She had been his rock throughout the whole ordeal, supporting his decision to speak up even when it meant dealing with investigations and media attention. "Are you glad you didn't just let it go?" she asked. He thought about the question. He thought about the letters Morrison had shown him, about the young lieutenant who had written to thank him, about the officers who had listened intently during the training session. He thought about Jenkins's other victims, finally being heard after years of being dismissed. "Yes," he said finally, "I'm glad. Not because I wanted to ruin Jenkins's career or make the police department look bad, but because sometimes good people have to stand up and say this isn't right. If we just go along to get along, then nothing ever changes. Bad behavior becomes normal, abuse becomes acceptable, and people suffer. You sound like the officer I married," she said with a smile, "always doing what's right even when it's hard." "Doing what's right isn't always complicated," the colonel replied. "Sometimes it just means staying calm, standing your ground, and refusing to let anyone make you forget your own worth. Everything else follows from that." Several months later, the colonel received a letter from the Department of Defense. It was a formal commendation for his handling of the situation. The letter praised his composure under pressure, his professional conduct, and his contribution to improving military-civilian law enforcement relations. The commendation would be added to his permanent record, a small note in a career full of bigger accomplishments. But to the colonel it represented something important. It showed that the system, however slowly and imperfectly, did respond to injustice when people were willing to stand up. He framed the commendation and hung it in his home office, not because he needed recognition, but because he wanted to remember the lesson. Authority without accountability fails everyone. Power without restraint becomes tyranny, and a badge, like a uniform, is only as honorable as the person wearing it. The colonel never drove through Millbrook again, choosing a different route home from his Pentagon meetings. But he heard through various channels that the town had changed in small ways. The police were more professional. Traffic stops were shorter and more respectful. Complaints were taken seriously and investigated promptly. Chief Morrison had transformed the culture of his department, using one bad incident to create lasting positive change. And in the end, that was all the colonel had wanted. Not revenge, not punishment, not money, just the simple idea that people in authority should be held to the same standards as everyone else, that power should come with responsibility, that respect should flow in both directions between citizens and the officers who serve them. Years later, when the colonel retired from military service, he sometimes spoke at law enforcement conferences about his experience. He always emphasized the same points. Stay calm under pressure. Treat everyone with dignity and remember that your authority is a responsibility, not a privilege. And occasionally, after his speeches, a young officer would approach him privately. They would thank him for speaking up. They would tell him about officers in their own departments who abused their authority. They would ask for advice on how to handle situations like his. The colonel always gave the same answer. Do what's right, even when it's hard. Stand up, speak up, and don't let anyone make you forget who you are. The system isn't perfect, but it can work if good people are willing to hold it accountable. Those words, simple as they were, came from a lifetime of service and a single evening on a small town street, where one man's power trip ended when confronted with authority, backed by integrity. It was a lesson that Jenkins learned too late, but one that the Millbrook Police Department, and hopefully many others, would carry forward into the future. The badge doesn't make the officer. The officer makes the badge mean something. And when officers forget that truth, it's up to good people, whether they wear uniforms, badges, or neither, to remind them. That was the real story behind that evening in Millbrook. Not a tale of conflict between military and police, but a reminder that all authority comes with responsibility, and all power must answer to justice. In the end, the Pentagon Authorization badge wasn't what ended Jenkins's power trip. It was simply the catalyst that forced everyone to confront a truth they had been avoiding for too long. That accountability matters. That dignity matters, and that no badge gives anyone the right to forget those simple truths.